This conference will now be recorded.
All right.
Hey everyone, want to welcome you all to our Gearhart City Council work session. Tonight's topic is the Clatsop Plains elk collaboration with Oregon Solutions, and we've got a great group of folks that have joined us today to go over some of the ideas and the executive summary that has been created by working. Gosh, this is a couple years now, Manuel, probably 2 years now that that this project has gone on.
Yeah, I'd say, well, I came in a little bit later after the project had already started, but I think from designation to now, yes, roughly that amount of time. The project team hasn't been meeting for quite that long, but the project has officially been a project for around that long. Yes.
Well, that's great, and this project was approved by Governor Kate Brown. And Oregon Solutions is basically an organization that works across jurisdictional lines, basically to help solve very complex problems. And as we know, population of elk and human interactions in Clatsop County have gone up in the last 10 years or so, and there's a lot of issues and things that have arisen from that. And that's kind of the genesis of the governor bringing Oregon Solutions in with the jurisdictions of Warrenton and Seaside and Gearhart and Clatsop County and private property owners and the ODF&W and the OSP and a lot of different organizations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chad, who is actually on the committee and in charge of one of the subcommittees as well. And he's going to do a general introduction, and then we're going to go from there. So thanks a lot, guys, for being here, and we'll turn it over to Chad.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that. And welcome all. Small group so far. It looks like about 11 folks that we have here on this particular work session meeting. My name is Chad Sweet. I'm the city administrator for the city of Gearhart, of course. I've had the pleasure of working with a few new friends that I've met through this process, and have been really impressed with this process and the way that they're working through a complex issue. And at the head of that is Manuel Adelio. He's been kind of running through these issues, and you'll get to know him a little bit more. Also, we've got Paul Atwood with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Paul has been fantastic in giving us a lot of the details. We've also got Sergeant Joe Warwick. I've worked with Joe from the fire department side for many years, and he has been wonderful to work with on this side. Joe is, and he can explain a little bit more, but he works for Oregon State Police, but he also responds to a lot of the fish and wildlife issues in this area. On the city side, you've got myself and Christy Fichter. She's listening in and has been assisting me in this program. And then we have councilors Rita Fackrell, Paulina Cockrum, Dan Jesse, and Carrie Smith, and of course, Mayor Brown. So with that, through this process and what we're going to hear tonight, each one of those individuals that are making a presentation can kind of give a little bit more on what it is it that they do and what their specialties are. And Manuel, if this is a good time, would this be good to kind of move on to the introduction of Oregon Solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thank you, Mayor Brown, Gearhart City Council members, Chad, Joe, Paul, everyone on the call. Yeah, so I'm a project manager for Oregon Solutions. And Oregon Solutions is an organization that works out of Portland State University, exists underneath the National Policy Consensus Center. And we've been around for about 20 years. And we work independently and in collaboration with the governor's office to do community problem solving and collaborative governance work across the state of Oregon. So we get asked to do all sorts of projects on all sorts of issues, big and small. So some are statewide and some are community specific. and they can range the gamut of pretty much anything you can think of. And we have a process that we go through. We receive proposals from community members, elected officials, state agencies, other entities and organizations on a problem that the community sort of all agrees exists, but they're not exactly quite sure how to go about solving the problem. And there's lots of reasons for that. But what we do is we receive these proposals, and then we go through a process of assessing the proposal and going through a series of interviews, and we write an assessment report that concludes with whether or not we think this is a good project to move forward with and give to the governor's office for designation. This project certainly was approved by the governor's office. And so what that does then, once designation is created, is that gives sort of opens up the process for finding conveners. We have two conveners, Mayor Henry Balanciefer from Warrenton and Mayor Jay Brown from Seaside are the co-conveners for this project. And I'm the project manager. And so then a project team is assembled of stakeholders that are close to the issue and have perspectives and expertise, and we try to lean into having a diversity of perspectives and a diversity of skill sets and expertise on a project team. Anywhere from universities to federal agencies to state agencies, local government, private business, and so on and so forth, make up a project team generally. And then what happens is we design a process, and we go through a process of figuring out how the community, the project team is going to come together to apply their skills and align resources to address the problem in a more holistic and comprehensive way than perhaps it had been in the past. So, and once the project team kind of gets its feet underneath itself, has gone through a series of research and investigation and all sorts of other things, the recommendations and actions are sort of agreed upon of how people are going to best play their roles and what commitments they can make that exemplify the roles that they would like to and can play in order to reach a positive outcome. And then a declaration of cooperation is created, and that declaration of cooperation is the sort of roadmap to the implementation of the work. And then Oregon Solutions steps out, and the project team moves forward and oftentimes brings in more people and more community and other experts after the fact to help to implement the work that they've all committed to through the declaration of cooperation. So we're getting fairly close now with this project, and we're on the verge of trying to outline a draft declaration of cooperation. And part of that is why we're here in front of you today to talk a little bit about some of the recommendations in that, some of the issues that surround that, and how Gerhardt might potentially play a role in its commitments to the recommendations and the goals agreed upon by the full project team. So I just wanted to give you kind of a background of what this process looks like, generally speaking, and kind of why we're here today to have this work session, and which I think we're all very grateful for, and kind of signals we're on the verge of success here. So we need to make sure that everybody understands what's going on and what they're being asked, and provide opportunities for asking questions and clarification. And this certainly isn't the only time this can happen, but it's a great first step. Pass it off to Chad.
Thank you, Manuel. And that was quite a few meetings, a few city council meetings. I updated you on the amount of work that really went into this. And so we broke into subcommittees, and I was put into as the chair of the human management subcommittee. And then those subcommittees would get together quite often, do the work, and we report back to the group. And a lot of recommendations. There was a lot of cross communication. It really was an interesting process.
And Chad, I wanna just make sure to highlight something that you touched upon, which is really the hard work and the dedication and the commitment of each of the members of the project team, and how much time and energy and resources they've already put in, that you all have already put in order to get us to where we're at today. So I just want to also say a big thank you to you all. And Chad, as the head of the human management subcommittee, you all have just done an extraordinary job.
Thank you, Manuel.
I have a question.
Yeah, Plano.
Yeah. So, Manuel, I did not see anybody from the county proper on the project team. Will the county actually be signing a declaration of cooperation, as well as the cities from Warrenton to Seaside?
Yes, there is actually a person from the county proper. Gail is the project team member who's representing the county.
Yeah, that's Gail Henriksen. She's the director of community development. She's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down on that list. And
The list is pretty small, so I mean it's tiny print, so it would be easy to miss a person on the list.
Right, got it. Okay, thank you.
You can see on that list kind of how diverse this was, and some people were able to participate a little bit more than others, but it was really good to meet these people, and that's part of this process. Is Manuel is bringing us together as a team, and because we're going to be working together moving forward. So Manuel, you've done this, I'm pretty sure, with some other councils and some other work sessions. The next portion that we have on this is information on the elk management subcommittee, the trends in Gearhart safety, culling, and the human management subcommittee portion of that. How do you think best to move forward with that?
I think what we can do first, if Paul and Sergeant Joe are willing, to kind of go through the first pieces on that, and then what we can do is we can talk all together really about the last couple of pieces there on that piece. But I think what Sergeant Joe and Paul talk about in terms of the elk management subcommittee, trends, elk trends in Gearhart, and safety will kind of set us up for the last two items on that piece of the agenda. So does that sound okay, Paul and Sergeant Joe?
Sure. Yeah, so Paul, maybe if you wouldn't mind going next, and then just kind of talking about how we got here a little bit.
Okay. Manuel, since you guys were part of this subcommittee as well, interject if I forget something.
Yes, of course.
On the elk management subcommittee, we had about let's see, 8 members. That myself, Joe from OSP, we had Mark from the City Council of Warrenton, OSU representative, Oregon State Parks,
Greenwood Resources,
and Gearhart Golf Links.
Yep.
Is that everybody?
And Sergeant Joe as well.
And Sergeant Joe.
Yeah.
So we talked about a variety of different things. Really looked at
one other person. I'm sorry, John on Oregon Hunters Association.
Right. Yeah. John Putman from the Oregon Hunters Association. So we talked about a wide variety of different tools. Looked at everything from, kind of classic wildlife management techniques, looking at population management and the different tools that we can use to, how we could get at population management. We looked at different habitat techniques, whether it's trying to attract elk to a certain place or what we could do to deter elk. We talked about elk behavior and some things we can do to try to reduce conflicts with people, whether it be like elk movement corridors or highway crossings, kind of like refuge areas where we could say attract elk to a certain place where there's maybe some land set aside. Um, we of course went through the kind of the gamut of ODFW tools, hazing permits, public hunting, kill permits, different sorts of classic wildlife management options there. One of the things that we also talked about, like say trapping and relocating, which has been a publicly popular idea, and of course the reason we're here tonight, we also talked about culling, and for a variety of reasons. And if there's questions, we can get into this, but there were a couple reasons. I guess I'll just address the trap and relocate versus culling, because that when we talk about population management in urban areas, those are really kind of the two that get people's attention. A couple different reasons we ended up on culling was because we don't have a place to put elk when we capture them, and it's also not a biologically appropriate management tool anymore. And we went through you think about wildlife management back in the early, late 1800s, early 1900s, when we had populations that were in vast decline. We kind of Johnny Appleseeded wildlife all over the place to try to kind of restart those populations, and we've come 180 degrees from that. We have elk everywhere in this state, and pretty much everywhere in the state where we have elk, we have too many elk. So there's really not a place for us to put the quantity of elk that we would need to remove to realize any sort of effective change here. Culling is something that has been done elsewhere in the state of Oregon, is a widely accepted, appropriate tool, especially in urban landscapes. So like I say, for those reasons, that was one of the recommended actions that came out of the elk management subcommittee. Is that a pretty good summary, Manuel or Joe? Do you guys have anything else to add?
Maybe, Paul, a little bit of background on the number of elk that we're dealing with here in Gerhardt, and what that looks like.
Sure. So we do every wildlife district in the state of Oregon does a aerial elk survey. It's about every February. So in Western Oregon, we fly our elk herds with a helicopter every February to get herd composition, and we count numbers. We've never flown directly over Clatsop Plains for a variety of reasons, because it's kind of a sensitive area to be hovering above with a helicopter, and you've got fences and whatnot. Last winter we did fly it. We didn't get herd composition data. We stayed pretty high, so we could count individual animals but not tell what they were. But Gerhardt specific, what we saw was I think we counted 149 elk in that herd that frequents Gerhardt. A couple of years ago, we estimated that herd at about 100 elk. I would say back in the early 2012, 2010 through 2012, that Gerhardt group was more down in the 40 to 60 range. So we've had a significant, in thinking about Gerhardt specifically, a significant increase in that herd. size. And correspondingly, right, we get more damage complaints. We have more issues with human elk interactions. Um, so.
And Paul, if I might, looking forward, what do you see happening within the next few years now that we're looking at approximately 150 elk?
Oh, well, I mean, just kind of doing the math, in my head, a herd of 150 last February, probably easily going to be in the 170 to 180s this year. And I would completely expect in the next couple of years we'd be pushing 200. I would also say that for whatever reason, I don't have access to some of my data, but from my memory, of flying these elk herds over Clatsop Plains, the group in Gerhardt is the largest. Um, so there's more elk in Gerhardt than there is in any other group within the project area. So most other groups are in the 100 to 120, and of course they lump and split throughout the year. But in the wintertime is when they're grouped up into the big groups.
So is there a reason why the herd has tripled in 8 years, the Gerhardt? I mean, can you attribute that to any particular actions that have happened over the last 8 years?
Well, there's no I wouldn't say that the herd has tripled because of something that changed in that time period. But when we think about, say, elk in Gerhardt, right? They have access to really stellar feed, right? They have everybody's lawn, all the fertilized landscaping. They've got 2 golf courses that they frequent. So when you have really high feed, really high quality feed, when you think about population dynamic principles, you have really good body condition going into the winter, right? And you have sustainable feed throughout the winter. So for those cows, the females, when you're in a really good body condition, you're more likely to carry your calf to full term. And when you give birth to that calf, it's in a better body condition than an average calf that's born. So you think about like the elk, uh, elk specific issues, right? They're sitting pretty much as good as they could be biologically. They also have really low sources of mortality. So there's essentially little to no meaningful harvest by humans. You have vehicle strikes, but other than that, there's really few, if any, predators that are in the project area that are making that are providing a meaningful source of mortality. So when you have really high pregnancy rates and really good body condition, what you're doing is you're essentially 90 it's not probably at 90%, but majority of the calves that are born pretty much automatically get recruited into the adult population, where more wild elk that have to actually work for a living, they don't have that sort of success recruiting uh, young elk into the adult breeding population.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And if I, Paul, if I understand correctly from, the sort of collection of information that has been accumulated over the time during the project, it's generally understood or thought that many of these elk herds, they don't, and in Gearhart as well, they don't travel too far within a certain area. They just tend to generally stay within just a few miles radius of wherever they're at. So they don't, they don't travel distances, large distances up and down the coast between the jurisdictions. Is that generally thought to be correct?
Yeah, if you think about that's generally correct for Roosevelt elk, which was what we have on the west side of Oregon. When you think about Rocky Mountain elk, um, folks are pretty. Seems like it's pretty common knowledge. You have this principle of summer and winter range where those Rocky Mountain elk, they're in the mountains in the summer. They come down to the valleys in the winter into the sagebrush steppe habitat. In Western Oregon, you don't see elk herds move like that. In the forest, at best, they have, somewhere between 2 to 5 square mile home range. That's even more uh, deafened in the project area. You know, the group that's on, say, like Camp Rylea is pretty much always around Camp Rylea. They'll venture off the army base into the surrounding private lands, but they're in that area somewhere. Um, Same thing with Gerhardt. So those elk will go north, further in Surf Pines, and you'll see them cross the estuary down by the high school and Seaside. But that's when you think about the geographical layout, that's really not that far to move. Um, so,
And they're not often crossing the highway either, moving back and forth into the more rural areas between urban areas like Gerhardt and the more rural areas where hunting could generally take place. Um, it seems as though the project team has kind of reached the conclusion that there's not a lot of like back and forth transference east and west between herds.
yeah, it happens, but it's not frequent.
So how many herds are there in Classic Plains?
Well, that answer, like I say, that answer changes throughout the year because groups of elk kind of lump and split off throughout the year. But if we think about what we've mapped from our surveys in February, you have a group in um, you've got a group in Gerhardt, you've got a group in um, Camp Rylea, you have like a Fort Stevens, West, Hammond, West Warrenton group. You've got a group like north of Fort Clatsop National Historic Park. There's a group kind of in that triangle of Warrenton between 101, 104, and the river. Um, there's probably a smaller group near like Delmore Loop, that area.
And then South Seaside, is there a group in there?
Yep, south of Seaside. Yeah.
And then Jewel?
There's Elk and Jewel. That's outside of the project area.
Yeah, okay, great.
Right.
But within the county, got it. Okay.
Yeah, within the county, absolutely.
Joe and Paul, would you be able to speak a little bit to the safety issues and the damage complaints and some of the reasons why this project has become as important as it has for the communities in the Clatsop Plains area?
I can talk about damage complaints first, and then Joe, if you want to take the public safety. One of the things that I think why we're here, and what I've said pretty strongly is, the tools that ODFW has to deal with like wildlife management and populations and addressing damage. We have a set of tools, and admittedly, they don't all fit everywhere. And this is one place where they really don't fit well. So when we're talking about elk inside city limits, our lethal control tools all go away. What we would generally afford to the public When you're inside city limits, you can't use those tools. So what we can offer people to help address damage is pretty limited. That would include something like a haze permit, um, advice on, say, different fence designs, things that they could do to keep elk off their property, um, and even how you would execute a hazing permit outside of city limits is very different than what would be legal inside city limits, just because you can't discharge firearms. So if you were in the country, uh, we would be advising folks they could use a shotgun with birdshot. They could apply to the state fire marshal's office for cracker or banger shells. Um, you know, and pretty much anything below that. Where inside city limits, you have when you get into the discharging of firearms, a lot of those options go away. And of course, when you have neighbors that are close, some of your say non-firearm options go away. You wouldn't be using a propane cannon inside city limits to make a bunch of noise to scare elk away when you have somebody that lives 5 feet away from you. Unless they wanted you to do it too, right? Or an air horn, or there's just certain things, right, that you have to be attentive to your neighbors and other people's desires. So, the damage perspective, yeah, we get quite a few calls about damage. Certainly, both golf courses have damage on their properties. When we talk to homeowners, um, also because their properties are small, they can only really do something about elk on property that they own. So if you have vacant lots that people don't own, that somebody is of different ownership, um, you can't go chase elk off those properties unless that property owner has a hazing permit. So you can only execute the tools that we can give you on property that you own or lease. Um, so if you have kind of this checkerboard of neighbors with conflicting desires, um, then some of our tools are really limited in their effectiveness.
What about public safety, Joe?
Yeah, so I don't know quite everybody on the meeting, so let me just start by saying that I work for the Oregon State Police Fish and Wildlife Division, so we're the game wardens for Oregon, and we deal with the issues that arise with negative interactions between people and elk, like on a more acute basis than what Paul's talking about. Um, and we work with all of our local law enforcement partners as well, Gearhart PD, Warrenton PD, the Clatsop County Sheriff's Office. And so all law enforcement sort of involved in that, but they all also sort of look to us for our expertise in dealing with fish and wildlife. And I've been on for just about 11 years last week. So I've been on for 11 years. And in that time, as I've watched those numbers of elk grow, we have seen a greater instance of negative interactions between people and elk. It's still pretty rare that there's a public safety issue directly related to a human elk interaction. But of course, as the numbers have gone up, just the opportunity to have those has gone up as well. And so we end up getting calls when elk are the elk in Gearhart or in Warrenton, but in this case, we're talking about Gearhart, sort of set up shop and have a reason that they might be aggressive with people. So, for example, in the spring when the cows have their calves, then they might get defensive of their calves, and that can cause some negative interactions with people. In the fall, when the bulls are rutting or during the mating season, they can become a little more aggressive, and we can have some issues then. So, as those calls come in, we sort of deal with them on a case by case individual basis. Um, there's not a whole ton to be said about it. I will also say that we also deal with complaints that arise from the actions of hunters in relation to the elk. And I'm not here tonight to sort of steal Paul's thunder as the fearless leader of the elk management subcommittee. I just wanted to be around in case anybody had any questions when we get to that section that directly regarded safety. But some of the other issues that we've seen over the years are unsafe discharge of firearm practices related to hunters when they end up discharging a firearm, or even a bow and arrow, too close to other residents. We deal with cases where usually it's archery hunters where they might shoot an animal on property they have permission to hunt on, and then it doesn't go down right away, and so it moves over onto property they don't have permission to be on, and the owner of that property might not be quite so friendly toward hunting as the owner of the property it was shot on. So we end up kind of mitigating between the hunter and the landowner that's not so friendly with hunting. So yeah, I mean that pretty much sums up. Like I'm concerned with the safety of citizens, number one, right? In everything that's going on, like no matter what actions are taken by a city or any group, my point of view or my perspective is the word I'm looking for, is that nothing can outweigh the safety of humans and the public in implementing those things. So I don't have a whole lot else to say, but maybe I missed something if Paul or Manuel has anything to add that we talked about in our committee meetings.
No, I mean, I think the only things I would potentially add to that is just we don't have Jay Pudwell here. There's the ODOT perspective on safety, traffic safety, and the sort of exponential increase in collisions over the last handful of years. And I think everyone knows about the sort of mythical proportion incident when an 18-wheeler plowed through about 27 elk or something to that effect. That's sort of on the extreme end, but if Jay were here, he would show you a graph at certain mile points along 101. There's been an increased number of traffic accidents or car collisions with elk that have resulted in the fatality of the elk. And so ODOT, they respond to the elk that are already dead, basically on the side of the road. But they've been tracking and collecting that data for some time, and have seen an increased uptake over the last handful of years as well. And then I think the only other thing that I can think of in terms of, I'm not sure if it's exactly public safety related, but I think it does, from what I understand, from what I've gathered from all the members of the project team, causes quite a bit of frustration, and that is sort of sometimes the disparity between how residents sort of understand elk within the community and how tourists understand elk within the community, and the actions of tourists, and the sort of propensity of tourists to stop off on the side of the road, pull off onto the shoulder to take pictures, to get too close to elk, not follow practical safety guidelines, and to just think of elk are admittedly very beautiful, and when you see a herd of elk on the side of the road 10 feet away from you, it's exciting. I mean, I feel like that every time I was coming to Gearhart to do project team meetings before COVID hit. It never really gets old, and so it's totally understandable why people get excited about it. And I think sometimes that excitement and just a little bit of lack of experience can tend to create situations that can be frustrating to people who are also trying to move through on the highway, and also who are in the urban areas, in the cities, and are sort of their movement is being impeded, or their actions are being taken by tourists that people don't necessarily appreciate. So I know that there's that factor as well. And in a very touristy set of jurisdictions like Seaside, Gearhart, and Warrenton, that can sometimes be a major issue. The question, I'd like to ask you all too. What do we know has been tried, and how successful do people feel the things that have been tried previously to sort of this broader management plan that's being created now? Like, does it seem like there's things that have been successful, or does it seem like the options are getting more and more limited, or things are sort of reaching a head in tension between the increase in elk population and the tools that are available or have been traditionally tried? I'd just be curious to kind of hear from those who know what they feel like the situation has been, and kind of why we might be where we're at today with the creation of the project.
And Manuel, who are you asking on that?
Joe or Paul or Chad, anybody who's on the project team who has sort of talked about this.
I'll take a little stab at it. So, I was on the human management side of things, but we shared a lot of information, and as the information kind of came to light, we would rely on each other to educate the other groups. But as I was saying earlier, the good body conditions and the less disease, and in the past they were in the woods and having a hard time surviving, but here they've got plenty of calories to eat. So there's really not a hard winter, as we talked about. What has been tried is, a haze and herd. Matt can probably speak a lot about that on the golf course. But they would, even the Gearhart golf course for a period of time had a hazing permit, but they found that the harder they pushed, the faster they moved these elk, the more damage it did to them, and potentially they became very worried about the damage it was going to do to somebody walking down the street that is suddenly in the middle of a herd that has been hazed. So that's an approach that's been taken. City staff takes a lot of phone calls and things about outreach and plantings, and trying to get people to understand, well, maybe if you planted something different, they may not be so attracted. But most everybody is more concerned about what they planted and want to maintain their lifestyles. So this is something that the Human Management Committee has taken up as far as conversation, and we have some ideas on that. So discussions, people are on edge, some hazing, and a little bit of outreach is what's been tried in Gearhart.
Well, we did pass an ordinance saying don't feed them.
Oh, thank you. Yes, and the do not feed the wildlife ordinance, that definitely includes elk. Thank you, Paulina.
I was just going to say, I think from an OSP perspective, a law enforcement perspective, everything is so dealt with on like a here and now individual basis that I wouldn't say that we have done anything specific other than to add on to Chad's outreach. I mean, I know we've had a couple of town halls that I've attended in Gearhart and in Warrenton where we've sort of pushed people or pushed the information onto people about how their behavior affects their interactions with the elk. Problem with that is, in both those cases, we were only able to reach the people that were willing to be reached and come to the meeting. So, I think that probably some people were educated in those instances, but, a broader approach, I think, could be a lot more useful.
Paul, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Joe and Chad covered it. The town hall public education, the ODFW tools that I mentioned earlier, which is really, essentially it's been limited to hazing. Try to provide folks as much advice as we can, within the constraints of whatever their, wherever their property is or whatever they can do. Every say damage situation is different, and to some degree takes a little bit different flavor of advice. We do a lot of site visits to private landowners when they do contact us with damage. So yeah, just trying to meet people, talk about things. Yeah.
It seems like one of the takeaways, I think, and it seems like consensus, at least on the project team, is that the whatever the status quo is, and it's a little bit different in each jurisdiction, I think. Um, but but if we kind of stick with the status quo, then it's the expectation is that things are just going to get a little bit worse and worse every year, given the conditions I think that you had outlined, Paul, with the condition of elk and the relative low mortality of elk and the lack of some of the options that would be available outside of an urban context to be able to reduce the population. So I think is that, first of all, is that correct? That we could just kind of expect this trend to continue to go up, and for potential conflicts or safety issues or community tension to kind of increase as time goes on, if we kind of continue down the road that we seem to be traveling at the moment.
Well, I guess I would answer that as I would certainly expect local elk populations to continue to increase, and until we can do something about, I think about this problem in a population dynamics perspective, right? Until we can change some things to, add sources of mortality, there's really not going to be any fast way to deal with this. And with more elk, becomes more damage. I think I've talked with, with Gerhardt, Highlands, and Astoria Country Club, and the reality is, whether it's a golf course or a farm, an ag situation, or somebody's say residential property, 150 elk causes a lot more damage than 100 elk, and 200 elk will cause more damage than 150 elk. So I don't see how the things would improve, kind of continuing on with status quo.
Paul, what do you think the capacity of Gerhardt is as far as elk? I mean, how many more elk? Is there a period of time to where they're just, do we have enough capacity to keep adding as far as calories and space?
I think where we're at now is not even close to the top, to be honest. I was talking to a rural Warrenton resident today, and she asked me that question, and I said, well, it's truthfully, biological carrying capacity in a landscape like this is essentially impossible to estimate. When you think about kind of those, population dynamic 101 type biology questions, you could look at available forage and try to make some estimates, but it's not a closed population, and I believe if say they were to hit a carrying capacity and things, their population was too dense. I mean, I wouldn't even be able to begin to estimate how many elk could reside in the area, but it's, where there is still cover, it is dense enough, and they're able to move around essentially freely as they need. So I wouldn't expect the population to do anything but increase into the near future.
Then just quickly, and thank you for that, guys. I got to work on the elk management committee with Denise Loffman, with Crest, with Gail Hendrickson, Clatsop County, Jay Barber, came in as a co-convener. Lisa Phipps with Department of State Land and Development, State of Oregon, Dr. Dana Sanchez with OSU, and a few others that were in there. And so we tried to tackle a lot of that, all right, so we've got this elk issue. What are the human implications, the safety, what kind of things that we can do? And that's how we kind of came up with a lot of the recommendations coming up. So I'll keep that short and sweet because we can get into that a little bit later. But I mean, is there anything more, Manuel, that we need to do, and other than just opening it up to the councils for questions at this point?
No, I think I think we've really covered a lot of ground. A couple things that I might add, and actually maybe I'll just read this so that everybody can hear it. But I think the purpose statement that the project team created is quite good. So I just wanted to read that really quick. It's very short, but I think it's worth hearing and taking note of. So the purpose statement of the project is that the community in and around the Greater Clatsop Plains study area seeks to reduce elk-human related conflicts. We've expressed a sense of urgency and willingness to work collaboratively to identify management solutions and implementation strategies. The purpose of this collaborative is to find viable ways to improve public safety and reduce property damage through outreach and education and a community-wide approach to reducing urban elk interactions while maintaining healthy and viable herds as a valuable cultural and natural resource. So, I think that purpose statement really encapsulates much of the sort of understanding and the spirit of the project team and the balance that the project team is trying to strike with regard to the situation, because obviously the issue of trying to reduce the numbers of elk or to reduce the number of negative interactions or so on and so forth within different communities is pretty complex, and people have lots of different perspectives about it, lots of different feelings about elk, positive and negative. And it seems as though the social carrying capacity issue is really in question now, and is becoming a more and more sort of salient issue for communities to be dealing with. And so, in the spirit of the purpose statement, the project team really it divided itself up into these different subcommittees. The elk management subcommittee dealing with management actions that are specifically dealing with elk population. The human management subcommittee, which Chad was chair of, which really deals with what can people do, what is the best approach that can be taken by communities to do their part and to play the best role that they can play in achieving the goals of the project statement. And there was also a data subcommittee that looked at a lot of data, and the other project team members sort of fed information into the data subcommittee as well. And there was a land use subcommittee that was created slightly later on in the process, because there was a real realization that land use issues are also at the heart of the issue of elk and human cohabitation within the Clatsop Plains area. So there was a really kind of holistic approach that has been taken, and really no stone has been left unturned. I mean, there's been a lot of looking at other communities that deal with this same issue, even worse than Gearhart or Warrenton. I think Paul could say where those are, but in Yellowstone and in other places in the West, there are, elk basically have overrun communities, it seems like, and you can watch videos online to see what that looks like. But so the project team was really concerned with trying to strike a balance and really look at all options that were available to improve the situation. And then each of especially the human management subcommittee and the elk management subcommittee went through the list of all possible available options that anyone could come up with, and ran those through kind of a matrix and scored those. And the recommendations that you see in the executive summary are the results of the scoring process. So those recommendations are really the things that rose to the top in terms of what people thought that could be done, that could be the most effective in trying to achieve the goals of the project and achieve a kind of balance for communities and for elk alike. And they're also then sort of out of that came these sort of common understandings that people really seemed, that I kind of gathered along the way in listening to people speak, and the themes that sort of came up again and again and again as project team members got together in subcommittees and as full project teams and as a full project team to work through to getting to the recommendations. There really were these themes that kind of rose to the top as well, and those are kind of outlined in the common understandings section. So I think those should be looked at along with the recommendations to try to kind of get an understanding of the big picture of for a broad-based wildlife management plan, elk management plan. It really is a multi-pronged approach, and there's no one thing that can be done based on what the project team seems to have generated. There's not really one thing that can be done that's going to solve everybody's problems here. That's probably going to suit everybody's perspectives or opinions. But there's a broad set of things that can be done, and there's a lot of room for community participation. And I think the work that the project team has generated has really shown a sort of willingness to be flexible and be very inclusive and also very scrutinizing of which things they think will actually work. And so so that's what I would leave this section with, and just for people to be able to reflect on that.
Hey, Manuel and Chad, before we get into the Q&A part, did one of you want to just run through, just verbally, just say what the potential commitments for Gearhart will be real quick? I know we've all got it in front of us. We're all reading it, but do you guys want to just really quickly run through that before questions? Or
yeah, I'd be happy to go through those. And Manuel, if you want to back me up, just in case I missed something.
So in the way
Sure.
And the potential commitments would be what the city of Gearhart would sign up on. These Gearhart's part of the solution, and it looks like a lot of it is educational. A lot of it is stuff that we've already discussed on a council level as well. So I see a lot of good things in here so far. So go ahead, Chad.
So providing information resources, no feeding ordinances to other communities. For other communities, we've always been willing to share that information, and it's probably something that we'd also share on the League of Oregon Cities site. Collaborate on fence design appropriateness for Clatsop Plains, the area, and individual communities. How would we change our fencing ordinance to give landowners more opportunities to keep elk out? Collaborate on elk and ecology appropriate landscaping and other mechanisms. So we'd work with professionals to help put together lists of appropriate things to plant so that they don't bring in more elk that might be more resistant. Help identify and troubleshoot land development issues with the need for wildlife corridors in mind. So as we're looking at development and we're looking at subdivisions and that sort of thing, how will this impact our issue that we have with elk? Community forums, on the results of this plan, or the collaborative. Seek community participation on implementation. Hold town halls. That's going to be really important, so the communities can get more information as you are now in understanding the complexities of the situation. Feeding guidance. We already talked about that. Create and lead 3 multi-jurisdictional committees focused on residents, K-12 education, and tourism. Kind of You know, what can the people who live here now do? What can we teach our children about the future and what's going on so they have a better understanding moving forward when they become adults? And how do we inform tourists, especially quickly when they're coming in and looking at these amazing animals? And that would bleed out into all sorts of different areas, such as hotels, visitor centers, Chamber of Commerce, City Hall, and that sort of thing. We talked a little bit about, again, changing local fencing ordinance. There are designs that are possible out there that might help create a space in between two fences that elk would not be likely to jump. But as we all know, they can easily get over a 6-foot fence. Engage and inform city council planning commissions for approving movement on work items such as movement corridors, land use, fencing, signage. You know, that might be something to look at. Support Clatsop County and educating residents and decision makers in relationship between land use planning and wildlife interactions. The other thing about putting this collaborative together is that not only would we do these things as a group and find specialists that would be able to help us out, but we'd also try to have common vernacular between all of us so that when people are going to individual communities, they're not trying to do something differently. They're getting the same message, and maybe that will help set a little bit more solidly. Partner with appropriate entities to help movement corridors, talk about that, to parks and state lands when possible. Review current subdivision ordinances as they relate to elk. Work with partners to propose land use changes, you know, requirements, buffers, and that sort of thing. That would maybe alleviate some pressures as the elk herds grow. Identify wildlife transit areas, you know, and determine the need for new ordinances or ordinance changes. Might be part of a comp plan review. This is something that should probably be talked about when we look at our comp plan and how we can move forward with some of these things. Collecting more precise data, so continuing to do what we're doing right now. With Mayor Brown's help, we designed the elk interaction process on our website that works pretty well, but what more could we do, including of tracking these herds a little bit tighter. Maybe a notice for future purchasers, you know, that, hey, welcome to Gearhart, here's a thing, we have elk. And then that way they get an understanding and an education as they come into our communities. Align hazing interpretations with other jurisdictions, you know, what's working, what's not, what's legal, what's not. And again, you see the fence ordinance in there. Lots of development of, you know, education materials, development and implementation of K through 12 materials, you know, we've been talking to educators about how that would be, how do we do it, who would do it, how much time do they have to do that. Develop and disseminate tourist educational materials in collaboration with relative partners. Effective fencing options keeps coming. Develop a safe distance from elk guidance. And that's, you know, on the tourism side for sure, and for the kids and the people that live here. Nobody wants to see somebody backing up to an elk and taking a selfie and getting injured. And then with that, the appropriate signage, telling the story. So there's a lot of work in here, but as Manuel keeps telling me, there's time to do it, but the problem keeps growing a little bit. So
well, we're expanding, you know, Gearhart has, you know, kind of taken the lead on some of the data collection and some of the education. And so, you know, I think this is a really good list of commitments that the city can definitely get behind and can kind of continue with what we're doing and help the other communities do the same. So nice job.
Had a good team.
One thing I noticed was that culling wasn't on the Gearhart commitment. So is that because we don't allow that in our city, like a discharge of a gun?
Well,
why?
currently our ordinances, yeah, it is illegal to discharge a firearm in Gearhart or any other type of weapon that can cause harm to somebody else without a permit. And the permit issuer in Gearhart is the chief of police. And Chief Bowman and I, and actually even Sergeant Warwick and I, we've had conversations about how limited our space is and how dangerous. Not necessarily this with Joe, but more with Chief Bowman, how dangerous it is in our area. So Bowman and I looked at maps. We tried to uncover maybe some areas where it was possible. We had the discussion of, bow and arrow. Okay, best case scenario, bow and arrow, archer sitting in a tree shooting down, but again, we talked about all those issues. And there wasn't a way that he at this time would see it ever possible for us to conduct culling within the city of Gearhart boundaries.
I would also add to that it seems like what people, and please correct me if anything that I am saying is wrong or is not representing some of the conversations that have been had correctly. But I think it seems like what people have come to the conclusion on is that strictly within Gearhart city limits, there may not be really many options at all when it comes to thinking about conducting culling operation safely. Although I do think it would help people to understand and to gain clarity on sort of like all the places that have been considered, and kind of turn over all the rocks so that people kind of know what locations have been considered and what locations potentially haven't been considered. But it seems like within the boundaries of the city limits of Gearhart, there are potentially few options available that people would even want to talk about or feel comfortable with. Although there might be some one or two options that could be put on the table for consideration, and people could kind of weigh in on whether or not they think that's viable from a safety or from a community acceptance perspective. But I think the other thing that probably can be considered, as far as I understand, is looking at ways that Gearhart could approve culling operations that exist outside the specific boundaries of the city limits of Gearhart, but happen in more slightly rural locations, potentially to the north or south, that involve partners who are landowners, that ODFW might be willing to consider a kind of arrangement where a city passes a resolution in collaboration with an understanding that culling might happen in this better location that exists slightly outside of the city limits, but is geared towards elk that wander a little bit here and there outside of the city limits, but generally reside within Gearhart. So there could be other options potentially available to Gearhart that might strike a little bit of a balance and be a much more palatable when it comes to considerations of safety in culling operations.
So what body would actually approve culling? Would it be at the county level? Or can OSP approve it, or ODFW?
Paul, do you want to explain what the sort of general process is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the steps for culling would be, in these scenarios, it'd be a local government, whether it's a city or county, applying through their resolution. It'd be, the governing body passes a resolution requesting a permit to cull elk from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. In addition to the resolution, in this case, like a city, would come up with some sort of plan in conjunction with ODFW on how they would execute a culling permit within kind of the constraints of the landscape and their, in this case, their city. Once ODFW is comfortable with the plan, we would issue a permit, and in the state of Oregon, the kind of the contractor that would have to be doing the actual work on behalf of a city would be Wildlife Services, which is a federal agency. They're kind of that relied upon independent third party agency that could work as the agent in this case of a city to actually implement the plan.
Thank you.
Manuel, do you want me to talk about, elaborate a little bit about the kind of city limit boundary stuff that you had mentioned earlier?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So one thing, when we think about culling around the cities, we acknowledge that these elk herds, a city limit boundary is, of course, means nothing to them. They move in and inside and out and various patterns, right? But if we had, the scenario was right where we could make a biological justification that maybe the place to get at a group of elk, the best place would be outside of city limits, but it was a group of elk that was biologically associated with that city, right? So what we couldn't do is say, like, have the city of Warrenton pass a culling resolution and then use that to try to cull elk in Gerhardt when those elk never travel that far. Right? There's no connection there. But if it were a scenario where, say, specifically in the case of Gerhardt, these herds, are moving onto, say, larger tracts of private or public land, if that exists and that opportunity is there, outside of city limits, in a place that would be, safe and doable to execute these culling permits. That's something that we could consider. Of course, you'd have to have, the buy-in from the landowner or manager, whoever that might be. But
So it opens up some opportunities for considering other locations that haven't yet been considered to conduct a culling operation that doesn't exist specifically within the city limits of Gerhardt, but for which Gerhardt might be implicated in taking the lead on passing a resolution. And I think the main idea, if I understand this correctly as well, is that a lot of the management tools that are available, let's just setting aside some of the constraints that exist within an urban context, and also considering not just the elk management tools, but the human management tools as well, and potential land use tools. A vast majority of the tools that are available, appropriate, and are considered to be potentially actually effective, they are longer term tools that won't be able to be fully appreciated in their effect for some time. And that there are few options available to bring about a rather quick reduction in the elk population, to be able to potentially get down to a level that is more manageable for a local jurisdiction and can serve as a sort of launching pad to then be able to manage the population of elk in a more substantial way, such that the population isn't increasing so dramatically from year to year. So the idea behind enacting many of the recommendations along a kind of timeline is to try to prioritize the things that can be done immediately, of which there, in terms of things that will take a more immediate effect, but there aren't many of those. So the understanding is that if a community or the traffic plan in general uh, wants to see a reduction in the number of elk that are residing within the city limits, culling is basically one of the only management techniques that can bring that about. All the other management techniques are also going to likely be effective, but they take more planning, they take more time to implement, and in getting elk to kind of do those things, and also, frankly, getting people to do the things that people can do. It just exists on a longer timeline, and anything around, like, for instance, elk movement corridors, or addressing land use issues and that kind of thing. It's all long term, and so the idea is to get sustainability and and effectiveness in dealing with this issue in the long term. And so it's a future oriented plan, I think. But it seems to me, from what I've been hearing, that people are asking for also some immediate alleviation, and it probably is not going to be likely to be able to bring those conditions about without the consideration and implementation of some kind of culling plan by multiple jurisdictions in the places that are deemed safe and appropriate for those actions to happen. That just seems to be the reality that everybody has come to the conclusion. And it's not it in and of itself is also not a silver bullet. It's useful for a very specific purpose, but the broader idea for the management plan that seems to be emerging is that that's more of it's a short-term iterative action that helps set the stage for the effectiveness of some of these longer-term actions. Did I get that right? Does that seem right? Okay. So maybe now's a good time for just opening up for questions, and certainly this isn't the last time that we can do this, but we have about 40 minutes left, 35, 40 minutes left.
I have a question for Paul. If we go to culling cows out of the herd, are we going to take 50 in 1 year? Can we do that kind of culling? Because quite frankly, they've just built 2 houses across the street from me, and it used to be a field that they'd lay down in during storms. And the last 2 storms, they basically were on the front porch of the one house that's still under construction. But I counted 32, and I'm sure they're this year's calves because of the size of them. So without a very strong culling of the females, I mean, what is the limit that ODFW would allow?
Well, I would say, based on our experience with this in other parts of the state and some of my colleagues that I've talked with, it seems like the constraint is not what ODFW would permit, but rather there's two potential constraints here. One is that these elk are required to go to, they're required to be processed and um, sent to charity. They go to the
Right.
local and Oregon food banks. Um, the other is, from what I've learned, is that Oregon or Wildlife Services, the state office, they kind of have their own chain of command up through a regional office, and there will be a limit that there'll be a limit that's put on the state personnel here as to how many elk, whoever the agent is that works on that would potentially work on this, how many elk that they'd be able to cull in 1 year. But I would say that in the instances that I know of, that number has been higher than 50.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I'm not sure who should field this question, but why can't one shoot, whether it be bow and arrow or center fire rifle, towards the ocean when the elk are on the dunes? I understand everywhere else in town that you've got to be concerned about your backstop, but you can see farther than the bullet will hit in the water if one, either heaven forbid somebody misses their shot or it actually goes through the animal before it stops. Why isn't that an option?
I can address that somewhat. So the no shooting ordinances, as they're implemented right now, they are not specific to certain areas. They are citywide, right? So to step outside of that, to specify an area that could be shooting or shooting could be done, that would be up to the city. However, I can tell you that Camp Rylea has a firing range, and their firing range, when they operate theirs, they are required to close down the beach out in front of the firing range. And the Coast Guard also goes out on the water and attempts to clear the area for a certain number of miles out into the ocean of ship and human traffic out there, because there are always people on the beach and there's always vessel traffic within bullet range offshore. And in fact, a lot of it's not as simple as like telling people closing an area of water like Buoy 10, because a lot of our north-south freighter ship traffic is within the range of a high-powered rifle bullet. So I don't know if that somewhat addresses your question.
It does, but I guess there's also lower velocity bullets that potentially could be used. And I understand this is a Gearhart issue, and our chief ultimately has control over at least the lands that Gearhart control. But say from a bow hunting standpoint, if you take away center fire rifles, it seems to me that your trajectory of a arrow is pretty well defined, and it wouldn't take much to close the beach down, at least in the range of what an arrow will fly if you're shooting west or from city towards ocean. It seems like that's a possibility, but it doesn't seem that has been approved or from the city's standpoint. Is that correct, Chad?
Go ahead.
That's correct. I mean, when you get onto the dunes in the Gearhart Park area, that's within the city of Gearhart. And then when you get onto the beach, that's State Highway 1 and Oregon Parks jurisdiction.
So I think closing the beach too is a bit more of a monumental task than it seems on the surface, because you have to have the person firing the bow and the elk in the right place at the right time. And once you have all those things in place, then you implement the beach closure, unless you're going to close the beach long term, which I don't think anybody's interested in doing. So that means you have a very short time frame in which to implement that closure. So I think it's just, I'm not saying that that's not a possibility. I'm just saying that I think that's a much more monumental task than it looks like on the surface.
I appreciate that. What's interesting, I'm an avid mushroom picker. And, mushroom season in the Northwest predominantly is during hunting season. And I'm amazed how often I hear bullets flying around in the woods when I'm mushroom picking, and nobody seems to give a damn about that. Yet we can't seem to figure out how to make elk cease to exist, or a group of them cease to exist in our community. I just find it fascinating. There's risk in everything. I guess the question is, how bad do people want the elk population to decrease?
I would say, based on what I'm hearing, that it would require a coordinated effort and a really tight plan to make that happen, and probably bring in a couple of other stakeholders that haven't yet, that haven't been on the project team. But at least from an Oregon Solutions perspective, that kind of thing is within the wheelhouse of any project. Certainly within the wheelhouse of any project that's Oregon Solutions has done. We've done things much more difficult than that. So I think it's just a matter of the community making a decision that it would want to do something like that. And then as long as there is community buy-in, I think the options for doing something like that are probably not outside the reach. But just as Joe has put so well, is just not as simple as one might think that it is. So just needing to take into consideration all of the different variables and collaborate with all of the stakeholders who would be involved in making it such an operation viable.
I appreciate that. It just seems like we're on a trajectory of this herd continuing to grow and grow and grow and grow unless we do something more drastic than trying to shoo them away. So maybe it's time to have a conversation with our community about how important is this to the community, and what does it mean we will have to do in order to make the herd not continue to grow and grow exponentially. But the idea that we've roughly tripled the herd size in 8 years based on what was said to us early on in this conversation, that's kind of scary. If you think about another 8 years from now, we have 450 elk in the community. Where does it end?
It's a lot of elk.
Right.
So Paul, my follow-up to that, how many elk we could call, cows we could call at one time, has it been, or do you know, has it ever been done where you direct the elk into a certain area, let's say the foothills of the mountains to our east, and then you just take whatever ones you want, or the number that you've decided, 50 or whatever, but they're up against a hill, you've got the stakeholders on tap. What I'm asking is, have you ever directed a herd, or heard of a herd being directed to an area that's safe to shoot, and you did the culling that needed to be done at that time?
What I would say is, generally when we're looking at a culling plan, one of the, say, day-to-day constraints, right, is the capacity to deal with elk carcasses. You have to field dress them, get them prepped for a butcher processor, and then what their capacity is. So in this case, it probably would be something where if there was like, hey, we can take 100 elk this year, we're going to go drive elk to someplace and take all 100 elk in, a short number of days. Certainly you couldn't take them all at one time, but it'd be more like a slow trickle. We're going to kind of, we have to meet the capacity of however many processors we could get on board, and then one of my roles and my staff's roles in this process is ensuring that elk carcasses arrive to processors in good condition, so they can be fit for processing and human consumption.
Right.
So if you have a permit for X number of elk in a year, you do have to kind of space that out a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The processor is the one that is the gauntlet, basically.
Yeah, I mean, in many cases, well, in all cases, right? These are private businesses that, they have their own operations that they're doing, and then they're adding capacity for a you know some number of elk per week, right? That they're not typically doing. So
Right. Okay.
So
Thank you.
based on normal hunting season patterns, when you have your first elk hunt and your second elk hunt here, specifically at November time, the local processors that take a good portion of those elk for the people that don't process themselves are that's a lot of animals they're processing in a few week period. So I'm assuming a special hunt could actually happen off season that would allow that similar capacity to go to private handlers to process, or does it have to go to a specific processing facility? Meaning, can we branch out to the normal realm that hunters would use during normal hunting season?
well, when it comes to elk that are bound for charity, they do have to be processed in a USDA certified facility.
It can be a state licensed facility. It doesn't have to be a USDA licensed facility. That opens up more options for us. And there is an effort being made currently to try to figure out what that process would look like materially for after a culling operation happens. There's some effort being put into trying to figure out who are the processors that would be available, how much would it cost. There are some specific things that have to be taken into consideration, like the needs for packaging and labeling. But the Oregon Food Bank and the local food bank are both prepared to receive pretty much whatever amount of meat gets processed within a given period of time. It always seems to be very popular with local residents when elk meat is available at the food banks. And then there's the issue of field dressing, and then store if there needs to be some storage that happens before a mobile processor can come and take care of the finer processing. But I know that Camp Rylea has offered cold storage space that they have available for the rough processing that's done in the field dressing process. And there are potential cold transportation options that may exist to take elk from where they've been processed in the field to Camp Rylea, who has a very, very large, currently unused area where they can hang elk that can wait for a processor to come and take them. So we're currently in the process of trying to put the puzzle pieces together to make sure that if and when a calling operation happens, all of that process is in place already to be activated.
So financially, is there money available for some of the processing costs outside of city dollars, or would that burden fall on the city of Gearhart in our instance if we wanted to cull elk?
It would part of it. I mean, we are in the process of trying to identify what resources may be available to relieve as much of the burden as possible off of the city. I think within Gearhart there are a couple residents that have potentially offered money to help with the cost burden of that, but it would require require a budget to be created for that process that could be reasonably expected to be accurate, or a general budget that where there's sort of guardrails for the furthest reaches of that budget. But if a budget were created and there seemed to be significant or buy-in from Gearhart as a city council, then I think there are options available for Gearhart to reduce the cost for Gearhart and have private money supplement some of the costs.
Any idea cost per animal, what we might need to raise in order to pull that off? I mean, I agree with you. I think there's private donors that would be happy to participate, but I'm curious what the approximate cost per animal would be to deal with them.
Paul, you have some of those numbers. I could look in my email if you can't find them as quickly as I could.
Yeah, I think what I've researched about somewhere in the $400 to $500 range an animal to have it processed. And I would say that's what I'm told is a conservative kind of high end estimate.
Okay, but say at the 50 animal mark that Carrie Smith's been using, you're looking at roughly $25,000.
Just for processing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I had. I've been a hog recently.
Are there others that have questions that haven't spoken yet?
I'm a public citizen. I'd like to say something if I could. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Tom. We'd love to hear from you.
Okay. Well, I've been hearing a lot about calling and I've been hearing a lot about trapping. What could you do a trap and call? It would make it more humane. You wouldn't have people out there shooting and hoping to get a fast kill. You could trap it, take it someplace, do a fast kill, have more control. Is that a possibility?
Well, that's certainly a theoretical possibility, yes. One of the, I would say in general, though, it's going to have, its utility will be limited. One of the reasons that we, besides not having a place to put elk once we trap them, when we're looking at trapping and relocating from an elk management subcommittee perspective, elk do get trap wise. So you get a group of elk that sees a trap, you get some of them to go in once. You might get some of them to go in a second time, but at some point, the elk just aren't going to go into that trap anymore.
I understand that.
So, but it is theoretically possible to use that tool.
Yeah.
I would generally advise that you would want it to be used in conjunction with, a sharpshooter in this instance. Maybe in a place where it's more socially appropriate. Because I don't think I don't think you'd be able to realize the benefits from culling if you say were to exclusively try to capture elk in a trap.
Okay. Now, the reason why I brought it up is it would make it less visual to the public instead of somebody out there with the rifle, on the beach or whatever, or wherever it's going to be, where people can see. That was my concern. That's it.
Yeah, I don't know if on the intelligent level Paul, you might be able to answer this, the difference between horses and elk, which one would maybe be considered a little bit more intelligent, but we do have a little experience. Sergeant Joe, I don't know if you were there. I know maybe Paul, you were, but we did try to wrangle an elk here in Gearhart, the one we were having difficulty with years ago, and that was eye-opening on how much work that took, and then how much risk we opened the community up to when we were trying to tranquilize an elk to move them to another place, because this is the one that was chasing kids off the dunes that year. But again, we left all these things on the table also, and bantered them around. Nothing was off the table through these conversations, as I think Manuela said earlier. So we are still interested in having those conversations about culling and that. So and somewhere it's got to be talked about within Gearhart also.
This isn't a question, but it's just a comment. If culling was one of the first actions taken, one thing that I'm concerned about is that there will be this relief, if you will, from the problem, because because instead of 150, now we've got 100 or whatever, and that the steam behind all of this education and systems management, fences, whether or not we want to use all that fertilizer or all those things that you could do, I'm afraid the pressure will go away, because there will be a perception, oh, it's not a problem anymore. Anybody want to comment?
I would. That's a great. Well, it's not a question exactly, but it's a concern, and it's a really valid one, I think, especially with I think when you're dealing with something that's kind of right in front of you, and then it's not there immediately anymore. It's easy for people to kind of forget quickly how things were, or to have a future oriented perspective, and to consider the fact that it could get bad again if these other management actions and tools that are community oriented, land use oriented, and also elk management oriented, if those things aren't put in place and implemented as as time goes on after any culling operation has happened, then yeah, things could, it seemed, based on the numbers that Paul is talking about, the replacement rate, things could easily get as bad or worse within a short period of time, within 3 to 5 years. So, or even sooner potentially, if things aren't, if other things are implemented in conjunction with that. So I would say, one of the things that the project team has talked a lot about is a unified approach. And part of that unified approach is developing a very, very clear communications plan, and really walking communities through what the expectations are and what they can likely expect if X is implemented, but Y is not implemented, or what the purpose of culling is serving, and how that is buttressed by all of the other non-lethal options, which form the vast majority of the options, quite frankly, recommendations. How all of those non-lethal recommendations are geared towards taking advantage of the momentary opportunities that are provided by culling, and then building off of the success of that. And really, I think in some respects, creating a kind of community culture around elk stewardship that might not potentially exist within the Clatsop Plains. So it's really about a solid education effort and community engagement, robust community engagement that goes along with the different management actions. So people are really clear in their understanding of what's happening when and why, and how that fits into the larger picture. So it would be incumbent on all the project partners and affiliated participation of community, but small business and what have you, to really make this a reality for writ large for the Clatsop Plains in terms of people's understanding of the plan and how the plan is being rolled out and what the expectation for success is for the different elements.
Is the project going to stay intact for all of those things to be done? Or is this the end of the project?
No, that's a great question. So Oregon Solutions part in the project ends more or less with the signing of this Declaration of Cooperation, which I briefly touched on, which is basically an outline of all the commitments of all the project team members. And so once that Declaration of Cooperation gets signed and established, and sort of people know what they're going to do moving forward, there is a plan, process that would be in place to make sure that the implementation of the different recommendations and the commitments that people have made moves forward. So, the project team members will continue to convene on a regular basis. People will consult with each other and talk with each other about the timelines that things are getting implemented on. Meet regularly on progress, troubleshooting any issues that come up, and there'll be a place that will continue to convene the project team on a regular basis for the foreseeable future, as long as the project team is feeling that they need to continue to implement the different recommendations. So things will thin out as time goes on. You can expect that certain management items will be sort of clumped in the near term, and then several will happen in the long term, and it'll just take time to continue with the process of planning and implementing those things. But there is a place for the project team to continue to convene, and an expectation that they will. Now, where Oregon Solutions comes in the aftermath of that is that we come in about a year and a half later, and we reconvene the project team, and we sort of do an assessment of how well things are going, what problems may be arising, how we could best help play a role if the project team feels like we are best suited to that, to help the project team members unstick issues that they have, and obviously to cheer them on if things seem to be going fairly smoothly. So we continue to be involved after the Declaration of Cooperation is signed. And as a project manager, I will casually be checking in with people as the months and years roll on, just because I like to do that, and I think it's important for me to understand more in real time how things are going with people. So there's an official check-in in about a year to 18 months, but I really like all the project team members that I work with, so I'd expect to be checking in with them from time to time just to see how things are going, and in a more timely fashion. Yeah.
Thank you.
Question for Paul. Do you know the ratio of male to female elk in the Gerhardt area? I mean, is it out of the 149 that was estimated in Gerhardt, are 130 female and 19 male?
It's probably somewhere. I mean, I don't have specific data.
Okay.
I would say that we specifically, when we survey them from the air, we specifically stay high, so we're not pushing elk.
Right.
generally when we're surveying to get that herd composition, we're really low, flying in a circle over a group of elk. We don't really want to be doing that around town. So I don't have specific data, but I would estimate that of say 149 last year, that at minimum 100 would be well, let me think. Probably more than that. 115 probably at minimum would be cows or yearlings.
Okay. So it conceivably in that 115, we could have, say, 85 calves in the next year.
Hopefully not that many, but you could. Yeah, I mean there could be a lot. And I would say too, right, as these populations continue to grow, as herds get bigger, they grow exponentially. So if you have, it's not a linear trend where you're adding, say, the same number every year.
Right.
When you think about the math with that, it's an exponential curve. The more you have, the more you
The
manage.
greater the increase.
Yeah.
Just think about COVID-19.
Sure.
A good example.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So what concerns me in all this is we didn't have complaints at 50 animals, but by 80 animals, it was starting to become a burden. Now we're pushing almost double that and yearly growing by some exponential large amount, more than 50 likely. How do we get back to 50? And we're talking about years and years and years of fighting this just to even get back to the point where people were okay with the volume we had in the community.
Yeah, I mean, it would certainly take persistent effort. I would say though, even when there were 50 elk, there were still damage complaints. So, and that's probably always. I mean, from my perspective, that's probably always going to be the case. There's always going to be somebody that, you know, whatever number of elk there are, there are too many, and those are the folks that I hear from. But yeah, I mean, kind of what we've lined out tonight and talking about, it would take, you know, uh, at minimum, a few years, couple 2 to 3 years of pretty persistent pressure to drive that population down. You're not going to do it. Probably be able to do it all in 1 year.
Thank you.
I think there's an expectation to, and that's, I mean, to piggyback a little bit off of what Paul said, it's the number of how many elk is too many, or how many elk is just enough, is really a part of it. I think an ongoing conversation for the larger Clats of Plains and for the individual communities that exist there, and there isn't. I mean, from what I can understand, there isn't a precise number, and so that's why for culling as an action in specific, it's a kind of a conversation, an ongoing conversation. I think the way that Paul kind of described it to me, which I think was pretty good, is you do it, you take a step back, you see how things are, you determine whether or not the city council and the community and ODFW all kind of get together and say, okay, maybe we need to do this again. It seems like we didn't take enough, and you do it again, and then you take a step back and you evaluate, and it's a praxis issue where you're kind of like, you're kind of going up and down a little bit, and you're implementing, evaluating until you get to a point where I think it's just the complaints are down to a point where it seems like a reasonable amount. There probably is an expectation that there will always be some damage and some nuisance that exists with the presence of elk in any urban community, and there's an understanding too that it's that Clatsop Plains is home to elk also, and that there's a lot of reasons that aren't the elk are not to blame for the tension that exists between elk and people. Urban expansion and other things also create the conflict as well. So it's really a dance. I think that each community is kind of in the larger, the unified implementation of this plan. Each community is kind of making a determination for itself of like, have we done it yet? Maybe not. And I think it's a good way for the community to keep in conversation with itself as well, and to really be present and to be true participants as community members in the implementation of this project. That I think, from my perspective at least, having facilitated other projects like this, that's always a good sign when community takes an active role in helping to make some of these determinations.
Great. Guys, we need to wrap this up. Chad, do you have kind of a closing wrap-up statement that you'd like to say?
No, not at this point really, but I did want to just talk, if Manuel, if you could just take 30 seconds to talk about the next steps for this group.
Yeah, so the next steps are really honing in and narrowing down for Gerhard on the precise commitments that Gerhard wants to make, and really the city council should have those in front of them. The list that's there is just it's a potential list, but most of those things, or really all of those things, are things I think Gerhard would probably benefit from committing to along different timelines. And also, calling isn't on that list, and we wanted to make sure to kind of respect the fact that it's unclear, up to this point, what Gerhard has wanted to do about that. But I would, encourage the city council to really consider how they can put calling on that list and what comfort level they would have in shaping what that looks like, right? So what would the city council like to see in terms of how that appears, and really consider that as a bullet point to add, because it is a piece that Warrenton is going to be adding, likely, not Seaside, because really they're a little bit outside the project area. They don't have the same kinds of issues, but having a kind of unified approach between Gerhard and Warrenton doesn't mean it looks exactly the same how that gets accomplished or where or whatever, or even that commitment is written the same. But I would highly encourage the city council to consider what that might look like as a commitment, and what steps would need to be taken in order to make that commitment. So that for Gerhard specifically, it's about finalizing that list and putting the stamp of approval on it, and then in parallel, the larger declaration of cooperation will be finalized as each of the project team members have finalized their lists, and then that declaration of cooperation will be put forward to the project team to give final approval, and then it will be signed, and everyone will get to celebrate that and get to see the culmination of the work that's been done by the project team. So we're really in the final stages. The last 2 months. I know that November is really what we're looking at. Beginning of November is what we're looking at for all of the jurisdictions to be able to kind of look at their finalized lists and present it to their councils and commissions for approval. So with that being said, like end of November is what our hope is for completing this process.
So that being said, I think that getting down to the precise commitments that the city council think would work, and anything else that they may or may not want to add in and any final thoughts. So we need to collect that from you, counselors, and so potentially, I can do that on a one-on-one basis, but it might be better in October to do a shorter work session, and maybe Manuel would be able to be involved with that.
Totally.
I'm going to be sending out an email also that is just going to kind of elicit any other ideas you might have, and I'll collect those and give those to Manuel, and we can see if we maybe need to consult Paul or Joe again moving forward, or as we said earlier, any other stakeholders that we might be interested in talking to. But we are getting down to brass tacks. So any final thoughts before we end the meeting?
This is Rita. I have a final thought. Well, can you guys all hear me? I really learned a lot tonight. And one of the dichotomies that I find really interesting is that people move to Gearhart because they love nature and they love to see the Gearhart elk walking down the street and they love all this stuff. And then all of a sudden the Gearhart elk start eating their lawns and their flowers, and all of a sudden they don't want to be close to nature anymore. So it's really kind of crazy. I don't know if people know really what they want. They want to save the elk. They don't want the elk in their garden. But I've really learned a lot, and I want to thank you guys all for educating me a little bit more. So thank you. That's it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for that.
Great. Well, if there's nothing else to add, I will be in contact with the city council and we'll decide how to move forward with getting those commitments put together. And I wanted to thank you all for your time, especially, Paul, Manuel, and Joe for helping out. With that, anybody want to make a move that we close the work session?
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Actually, we're not supposed to do motions, but appreciate that. Anybody have any more questions?
No, I just want to thank everyone for joining in. Appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great evening.
Bye.
Have a great evening.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.